I am probably one of the most unlikely people to be up here today because if you knew me as a child, I was painfully shy, gawky, awkward. And my parents tried to do everything to give me courage. They would put me in front of the camera, sometimes dress me up as a lion, thinking I'd get courage from that. That's not where I got my courage from. I realized the second I held a camera in my hands, all of a sudden, I felt like Superwoman. It gave me these secret powers because it took the attention away from myself and allowed me to focus on others. It allowed me to dive into these incredible situations and explore the world around us. But the more incredible and unexpected thing that happened was that photography and storytelling is powerful. And it really allows us to amplify other people's voices. And that's what really drew me in. And I'm going to just flash back to one of the first stories I ever covered. On a whim, I decided I was going to apply for this grant from the Alexia Foundation, never in a million years thinking I would get it. And much to my delight and sheer horror, I got it. And so with a lot of fear and trepidation, I began to pack my bags. And it was to go to this country in West Africa called Guinea-Bissau. It was then and still is today one of the poorest countries on the planet. And I wanted to talk about the healing after a long civil war. And when I got there, it actually blew my mind. It wasn't anything that I had read about because in mainstream media, we usually portray the whole continent of Africa in one of two ways. You've got war, famine, plagues like Ebola, or you can go on a safari and see exotic animals. And I'm not saying that both those narratives aren't true, but what I found was another narrative. And it was beautiful. I mean, it was about how connected people are to the natural world. They believe spirits lived in the trees. And, I learned so much there. I think very often, before we even pack our bags, we have the narrative already written in our head. And what I learned there was that, it takes time to truly understand one another's stories. And once you do, you're transformed. Something magical happens. And, I thought that I was going to stay just for a couple weeks, maybe a month, but those weeks turned into months. Those months turned into half a year. I learned the language of Pular, and I really stayed there and just learned how the majority of people on the planet live. And I stayed through the dry season when the food ran out, and all we had were those 2 bags of rice that I brought with me. And that's where I really learned what hunger feels like. And this is Halima and her baby, and to her and all the women, I was a total mystery. They'd be like, okay, you're in your early 20s, no husband, and you don't even know how to get water out of the well. How have you survived so long? But they learned to love me, they took care of me, and all these beautiful stories began to emerge. And on my last night, you can look at these pictures and think how different, how separate our worlds look. But, the thing that surprised me was not that, it was how much we shared. And this is Alio, who got a hold of my soap, and he and a whole bunch of children on my last night were asking me a million questions about my return home to America. Amy, do you have mangoes in America? Do you have cashews? And then Alio looks up at this sea of stars and this big, beautiful full moon and asks me, do you have a moon in America? And I promise you, I still think of him every time I see a full moon. And I've thought about the moon as a metaphor so much, and really look at it as this collective third eye looking down on our beautiful planet. From its perspective, there is a oneness. We are all connected. There's no borders, and whether we understand it or not, we're in this intricate web together. And I left there knowing what my mission was. I'm going to skip over 10 years of covering the worst kind of horrors of the world. I covered conflicts, in a lot of places. And at the end of that decade, I started to realize that all those things I had been covering, whether it was, human suffering and conflict or poverty, was always connected to our natural world. Because in all of those situations, we depended on nature for the outcome. And I also had this really profound turning point in my career 9 years ago. And I found out about 4 northern white rhinos that were being moved from a zoo in snowy Czech Republic back to Africa in this last-ditch effort to save the entire species. Because at the time, there were only 8 of them alive, all in zoos. And when I met this gentle, hulking, ancient species, I couldn't believe this is what we had reduced it to. And this is how we imagine wildlife, roaming the open plains of Africa. But this is actually what it looks like. They have to be guarded around the clock 24/7 by heavily militarized men because the value of their horn is worth more than gold right now. And I want to just flash to a heartbreaking scene. On March 17th, my friends called me and said, hurry, come to Old Pejida, because Sudan, the last northern white rhino alive on the planet, is about to die. And when I arrived, it was really the most horrific thing to witness. And total silence, all you could hear was the sound of rain, one go-away bird chirping, and the quiet sobs of these men and women who loved and protected this animal. They spend more time with these creatures than they do with their own families. And I just think, witnessing this, I just want it to be a wake-up call, on a world, a planet of 7 billion people. We have to start seeing ourselves as part of the landscape, and that our fate is connected, so deeply connected to theirs as well. Losing one piece of it impacts all of us. And I hope I never have to experience the last of something die again. Because this is what extinction looks like. It's happening on our watch every day. Joel Sartor knows, so many of us, so many of you do such an amazing job covering this. But, I realize that showing these kinds of images and focusing on the militarization isn't the whole story. I thought about this story a lot, and I felt like we tend to leave the most important piece out of it, and that is the indigenous people who live with the wildlife. What do they think? What are they doing? And it's been my mission to find stories of hope, where things are working. It's not perfect, but things are working. And this is Yusuf with 3 baby orphan black rhinos, another species of rhino. And another story I want to share is a beautiful story also in northern Kenya. I heard about it when it was just a dream. It was this community wanting to take ownership of the landscape and the wildlife that lived there. And everybody laughed at them in the beginning and said, it's impossible. Their dream was to set up the first indigenous own and run elephant sanctuary in all of Africa. Meaning, nobody else. It was the community taking ownership. And they understood that these are nature's greatest engineers, that they need these elephants to survive and coexist. And these men and women went from being afraid of elephants to becoming their greatest protectors. And the other really amazing piece of this story, it's about how they relate to the wildlife, but also how they relate to each other. Because it's the first sanctuary that also is hiring indigenous women to be elephant keepers, which is having tremendous ripple effects in how they treat each other and see each other. And I was recently there, and it was so funny. These Samburu kids had walked for like 12 hours through the desert. And I said, what are you doing here? And they said, we heard these stories about women being keepers. We didn't believe it. We had to see it with our own eyes. And so it's really having this impact, not just in the community, but also outside the community. And I think that we can look at these pictures again and believe that this is a story about adorable elephants or wildlife, but it's not. It's about all of us. It's about our planet. It's about how connected we all really are. And, I just want to end with planet Earth. It's the only home we have. And, we've poked some pretty big holes in this little shared life raft. It's deflating, and I think, let's not condemn the future generations to eternal poverty. The future is really in our hands. And a whole host of species, we may witness them eclipse into a myth just like the mythical unicorn. But all of us, all of you, have a voice and have the ability to ignite action, and find those creative solutions. People are smart. We can figure these things out. And so a friend actually said this to me, and I think it's so true. He said, the message, sometimes the messenger matters more than the message itself. So please, all of us, let's be the messenger. Use your voices, our collective voices. I'm just going to end now with a film I made about the sanctuary, and that's it. Thank you.
Preparing the milk for the aliens. I want them to have strong body. I want them to have strong bones.
Before we established this place, people couldn't imagine someone feeding an elephant.
Hosting elephants is something challenging, but elephants are someone can call a friend.
As a community, we were losing many elephants. We had to act quickly.
Over the past 25 years, we lost many elephants because of poaching and an ongoing drought. Without the elephants, we were all suffering. Our ecosystem was dying. We began to understand that elephants are the heart of this land. And for us to thrive, the elephants too must thrive. Something had to change.
Number hotel 1, this is Romeo 1, how do you read over?
1.
To protect these elephants, it was our dream to create a sanctuary for those that became orphaned. At Reteti, we bring injured and sick elephants back to health. We nurture them until they are ready to return to the wild.
Just shows don't give up with the bottle. If we give up, she'll give up.
They need somebody who loves and who cares, not somebody who can be discouraged.
To think of them going to the world after they accept us and we are now friends, it is very painful to see them going. I will live to appreciate them for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I'm feeding Lemurujo and Adosage. Sweet babies.
We are taking care of the elephants, and the elephants are taking care of us. We now see that when we coexist with the wild animals we once feared, our whole community benefits. We are all deeply connected to one another and to this earth.